So I want to just spend a little bit of time here and introduce you to who is behind Goats on the Go. Um, this is my family on the left, the Steels, and the Steenhook family on the right, Chad and Wendy and their three kids. And we're just really excited about our company and about the fact that we are two families who have similar values and similar interests working together to make this company happen. And now with our affiliate program to share it with you. And everything we try to do, everything we do at Goats on the Go, we try to be authentic about who we are and where we come from. And on that note, I'd like to tell you a little bit of a story here about why Goats on the Go got started. And really, it's kind of starts with these guys up on this round bale, these guys in their underwear. These are two of my sons. And you know, we moved out to the country about 10 years ago. My wife grew up on a farm here in Iowa, a very conventional farm. I did not, but I grew up always enjoying visiting my aunt and uncle's farm. They had a grain and beef cattle farm and helping with chores and those sorts of things. And so when we moved out to the acreage, we really just wanted to experience a taste of country living. And, you know, we had this little piece of land that was too big to mow, but too small to farm. And we made a little hay off it, like you can see here. And it was great. We loved it. But it turned out that a taste of it just wasn't enough. And so we got a few goats back in summer of 2012, really just to give our boys something to do in the summer, to graze down this extra little bit of land we had. And I'll tell you, I fell in love with the agricultural part of things. I only had 5 or 6 goats, but I loved watching them graze. I loved managing my little bit of pasture. And a thought kind of crept into my head, gosh, could I do this? Could I be a farmer of some sort? How is that even possible? Here in the Midwest, living in Iowa, land values are so high. If you didn't grow up on a farm and inherit land, you didn't dream of being a farmer. It didn't even cross my mind, even though I loved agriculture and visiting my wife's farm when we were dating, my wife's family's farm when we were dating, and then growing up and visiting my aunt and uncle's place. I never even allowed it to creep into my head that maybe I could be a farmer. But then we did this interesting thing. We had these 4 or 5, 6 goats that we bought to give our children some chores. And we had this little piece of our property. We planted a wildlife food plot, and it was a horribly dry year that year. And a lot of it didn't germinate. But what did germinate was these weeds. And after a while, pasture was getting a little dry and pasture was getting a little sparse. And I thought, you know what? What would happen if we put the goats in this patch of weeds? And sure enough, the goats ate that area down like I never would have guessed. Now, this would not be news to anybody who has experience with goats, but I was still a rookie. I was still a novice, and I was shocked. And that idea started to form and develop a little more. I and the Steenhooks, we knew that the Steenhooks, already friends of ours, shared this kind of love of the outdoors and love of farming, and farming in a non-conventional way. They were already off to the races with a small hobby farm. And in many ways, they were way ahead of us agriculturally. And yet they were struggling to get beyond these challenges that we have of land value and how do you just get started if you didn't start out in a farming family. We also shared some similar conservation ethics, and this picture here of these goats out on this landscape turns out to be a big part of what formed Goats on the Go too. This beautiful northwest Iowa lake and a little bit of timber next to it, and ducks and geese flying into this area. And as it turns out, this property in particular, owned by the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, needed some help from goats. We didn't know at the time that we would eventually be at a place like this. But the idea of merging our conservation ethic with agriculture really started, and knowing what we know about goats and what we saw our goats do really started to intrigue me. And so we went looking for examples of how goats could be used to manage vegetation, and at the same time expand an agricultural operation. So together, using goats for conservation grazing combined with the actual production of goats agriculturally, we started to ask the question, could that be a way to farm for a non-farming family? Could that be an entry point into running a farm operation? And sure enough, we headed in that direction and we're very pleased with the demand. And that's brought us where we are today. We started in late 2012 after that first summer of owning goats and seeing what they could do on our own property. And since that time, our clients have included the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, many city and county governments, schools, homeowners, businesses, private, not-for-profit conservation groups. And we've done projects anywhere from a tiny little backyard up to 30 plus acres using 300 plus goats at some point. And because of that growth, we launched our affiliate program in 2016. We now have 14 affiliates in 5 states. And here's how that came about. I told you the story about how we thought maybe we could expand our goat herd using someone else's property as pasture and not have to pay for it. In fact, maybe we could get paid for it a little bit. And as we tested out that model, we put up a web page. And as soon as we had our web page up and running, we started to get phone calls from people saying, how can I open a business like yours? How do I run a goat grazing business? What do you charge? How do you charge? How do you get customers? Who are your customers? And these are all questions that we were still figuring out for ourselves. So we felt a little sheepish about trying to answer those questions for people. And instead we kind of filed that away in the back of our brains and went on gaining experience, making mistakes, learning this business, because there were no real business models to follow. There were other companies that were using goats as to provide commercial grazing, but there did not seem to be a unified, proven business model. And even if there was no way for us to access it. It wasn't entirely obvious how this should work. So again, we were fielding these calls from people who wanted to run a business like ours. And at the same time, we were fielding calls from people all over the country who wanted to hire us. Now, we're in Ames, Iowa. Obviously, we can't serve someone in California, and we can't serve someone really even in Illinois very effectively. So it became time to expand, and we were not interested in adding employees all over the country. And so we went back to this idea of all these people who were in similar situations as us likely. They had a few goats, they'd experimented with sheep, they had a little hobby farm. How could I make this bigger? How could I get into agriculture in a bigger way? And at the same time, it turns out some of those folks shared the same conservation ethic we did and a lot of the same values we did. So rather than expanding by adding employees, we determined to help lots of other businesses like ours get started up all around the Midwest and beyond. We now have affiliates as far east as Ohio and as far south as College Station, Texas. And we just love the people who have chosen to affiliate with us. We are so thrilled and feel so blessed to have fantastic people join us as affiliates. So what is it that we do exactly? We are a targeted grazing company. And I love this definition of targeted grazing. It really lays out how this is different from uncontrolled grazing that actually gets a bad reputation from a management and conservation perspective, and how the way we do it actually turns into a conservation tool. But that's the fancy definition. Really, this is what it comes down to. Our goats eat the vegetation that our customers want less of. So very simply, we use goats to manage vegetation. So if we just go with the term targeted grazing, what's driving the market for this? Why is there demand for this? Well, what we're finding is that the public has a growing aversion to the use of chemicals on their property. And we don't see that going away anytime soon. We think that's a force that's going to continue driving demand for us. Folks just don't want to deal with the mystery of chemicals that they're applying to their property. Even though there's lots of information that says it's safe, that there aren't any long-term effects, that this particular herbicide becomes inert after just a few minutes after applied to the property, there's still so many question marks in people's minds. There's also this desire, or in some cases, people feel an obligation to be green or to make the sustainable choice. And that is a very strong driver for us when we position our goat grazing company as an alternative to the use of fossil fuels and an alternative to the use of herbicides. There's also this pop culture love affair with goats that we don't know what kind of legs this has. We don't know if this is just a fad and will go away soon or not, but you see things probably often in the headlines about goat yoga. If you go on to social media channels, you'll see pictures of goats everywhere. Little goats hopping around backyards. People just love goats right now. And we're gonna ride that wave as long as we can. We also find that there's this local foods and sustainable farming movement. And even in urban and suburban places where homeowners can't really participate in that in a hands-on way, they love the idea that a local and sustainable farm could come to them for a short period of time. We think that force is not going away anytime soon, and it will also continue to drive demand for targeted grazing. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, there is a huge invasive and nuisance plant problem all over Native America. When I say invasive plant, I mean a plant that is not native to the place that it's found. And not only that, but it's actually destructive of the other plants around it. It expands and takes over and has no competition from the local native plants. So what does that mean for us? Well, here are some numbers. I don't want to read them all to you, but the point is that we are spending worldwide and here in the United States, massive amounts of money to control invasive plants and nuisance plants. Many of our customers don't even know to use the term invasive. They just know that this vegetation is causing them problems and it's a real pain in the neck and they'd like to get rid of it. We are spending so much money on this and we're spending it in channels toward herbicides and cutting and hiring people to do manual labor to manage this vegetation. And now goats have been added to the mix. And the problem is so huge that goats will have to be a major part of the solution if we're going to get on top of the invasive and nuisance plant problem here in the United States. We've talked to conservationists, we've gone to conferences of conservationists and ecologists, and they are melancholy about this, very desperate. And they are looking for good solutions and they are prepared to pay for good solutions. So if that's the case, then why aren't we seeing goat grazing everywhere? Why isn't there a herd of goats in every local park? Why isn't there a herd of goats in every little bit of forest that has an invasive species problem? Well, we think there are several reasons, and we also think Goats on the Go is well positioned to solve some of those problems and make goat grazing much more common in markets all over the country. First of all, geography is a problem. We don't have professional providers of this service everywhere. It's a young industry, and we still have people jumping in, jumping out, kind of dipping their toe in the water, but not really committing to providing a professional service. That's partly because there's no standard business model to follow that I've already mentioned. To a lot of folks, this is still cutting edge, and the customers don't really know what to expect. They're taking a big risk when they search the internet for goat rental services or targeted grazing services. And when they pick up the phone to call or send off that email, they don't know if anyone's going to reply, going to answer the phone. And if they do pick up the phone, what kind of person is it going to be? Is it going to be someone who's professional, or is it going to be someone like that plumber who stopped by your house to solve a problem you have and treats you like you don't know anything and isn't dressed professionally and doesn't present him or herself professionally? And we think we are positioning Goats on the Go to solve that particular problem. to a great degree. And there's a lack of a recognized and trusted brand. We think until now, Goats on the Go, as I've mentioned, is in 5 states now and spreading very quickly. And so we think that just having that reassurance of, you know what, I think I've heard of that brand before. I think I've seen that logo before. And when I go and search for a goat grazing service, I find a professionally done website. There's just a great deal of confidence that we can extend to potential customers because we are a widespread network of goat grazing services rather than just that one-off company that you stumble across. And by the way, it is growing by leaps and bounds. Goat grazing is expanding everywhere, but it's still a young industry. That means there's a great opportunity for any company that would pop up in a particular market to cement their place and their reputation in that market and to beat competitors to the punch. Not only beat them to the punch, but position themselves as a reputable professional company that will be very difficult to compete with in the future. So let's just back up a little bit. And if you're familiar with goats, this may be a bit of a review for you, but the reason we use goats on our projects is because goats are very versatile. They're browsers rather than grazers, meaning they tend to eat up high and they tend to eat brush and broadleaf weeds rather than keep their heads down toward the ground where the grass is. As it turns out, goats really have a preference for many of the invasive species that Americans are spending so much money trying to control. Now, we don't train our goats to target those particular plants. We use them summer after summer on the same species of vegetation, so they do get used to it and accustomed to it, and they do develop favorites. But really, it's just kind of a fortunate coincidence that goats really do have a taste for some of these invasive plants. Not only that, but most of our native plants here in North America evolved with grazing from wild herds of grazers like bison and elk and antelope. So grazing is actually good for those native species, but many of our invasive species that we're challenged with don't respond well to grazing. So we can have kind of a dual benefit of improving native species while being stressful to non-native and invasive species. Goats also don't spread seeds. There's some pretty well established research about that. At least they don't spread viable seeds through their manure like sheep and cattle do. They're very agile, so rough terrain and steep terrain is not an issue. So we can put goats where humans can't do the manual labor. There's virtually no erosion if we manage the goats well. There's excellent demand for the meat and, by the way, the milk and milk products from goats. And they're cute. And I don't mean that in just a superficial way. Their cuteness is actually really important to our business. They are adorable and they are engaging. And what that means is we can provide a service that engages the public, educates the public, and creates an opportunity for our conservationists and ecologists and land managers to interact with the public. Now that's really important because those folks aren't just charged with managing public lands and parks and that sort of thing. They're also charged with educating and reaching out and engaging the public on these issues. So what we have here are some kids from a local school who came by to look at one of the projects where we were grazing a steep lakeshore next to the water. Now this teacher had these kids' attention like no other animal could. And it was a great opportunity for him to talk about the fact that the non-native invasive vegetation on this lakeshore, it has shallow roots. So it doesn't hold the soil in place on that steep slope. And when you don't hold the soil in place, the sediment and runoff tends to make its way down to the water, and that affects the water quality. And what would happen if we were able to get rid of this invasive vegetation and replace it with native grasses with really deep roots that would infiltrate stormwater and hold that lakeshore in place? And the teacher got to explain why the goats were effective at doing that. We also talked about some biology of the goats and how they're able to consume this vegetation when no other animal can. So it was a great opportunity to engage the public, and it's something that wouldn't happen if we had some other type of livestock there. So this is how it works. These two tools are very, very important to us. We have electric netting, you see in the top picture there, and a solar power source. Without this portable electric netting and the solar power source, it would be impossible to have the business that we have and to do the targeted grazing that we do. This contains the goats where we want them, focuses them on the vegetation we want them to focus on, and protects them from predators. So without it, we would not be able to provide the kind of service that we provide. We typically use about 40 goats. That may vary according to the project size. But on a project under 10 acres, 40 goats works well for us. And we'll put those 40 goats in a pretty small paddock, a pretty small enclosure to focus them on the unwanted vegetation. We'll hit that really hard and keep them there for just a short period of time. And then we'll rotate them on to the next piece of land right next to that. So we'll go half an acre to an acre at a time until we've completed the entire project. Occasionally we will, well, actually often we will do repeat grazings for certain customers. There are customers who want to use goat grazing as one tool in the toolbox, and they'll also use some judicious amounts of herbicide, and they'll do some manual cutting where they can. But we have other customers who want to use goats and only goats to actually kill the vegetation. And in that case, we do work with the customer on repeating the grazing from the goats several times over the course of a couple years. Just want to show you some pictures of what the goats can do. This is a very typical Iowa farm scene, kind of an old rundown farmstead that vegetation has started to get out of control. You know, you mow next to the building one year, and then the next year this the thick coarse vegetation has worked its way out a couple of inches, and pretty soon it's a couple of feet, and then it looks like this. So we were able to set up our fencing around this building site and bring in the goats. And after just a couple of days, this is what it looked like. We love talking about this project because we found this van for the property owner. And I know that sounds silly, but the property owner had honestly forgotten where he had put that van. But it showed itself after the goats had done their work. In this case, we have to the downhill side of this fence, we have some pretty high quality restored prairie, all native plants. But on the uphill side, partly because of the slope, we didn't get that, the property owners didn't get that native grass seed to germinate like they wanted it to. And they were unable to go in and carefully weed out the non-natives as they started popping up in this new native grass seeding. So it was time to just kind of start fresh. And we brought in the goats. And what you see here took no herbicide and no mowing, no equipment was used. But we've really thinned things out. And now we're allowing the sun to get down to the ground where we probably have some of that native grass seed still there waiting to germinate. And so when that starts to happen, we'll have far less competition for that native vegetation. And we might be able to go and add a little bit of extra seed. And we've created a condition here where the property owners are much more excited about going in and doing the maintenance they need to do in order to make this a thriving prairie. In this case, you see our goat there circled in the orange circle. She's barely visible in that vegetation. And after a couple of days from goats, this is what the property looked like. And in this case, you'll want to keep your eye on the vines on top of the little barn here. I'm going to grab my pointer right up here. The goats were able to climb up on the tractor back, and then up on the tractor seat, and then on the tractor tire, and then onto the top of the shed and clear out all of the vegetation. This is before the goats and after goats. People often ask us if we have trouble keeping our goats in. And the answer is that no, they're very well conditioned to our electric fence, and we almost never have trouble unless we leave them in one spot too long and the vegetation on the other side of the fence starts to look too tasty. And that's exactly what happened here. We were actually on our way in the car to go and move the goats to a fresh spot with fresh vegetation when we got a call from the customer saying, goats are out. So we pushed this probably just an hour too long. And you can see just about every leaf in that area has been taken away by the goats. So I've told you about the goat grazing industry, about our goat grazing business. Well, why on earth would anyone want to own a business like this? And I'll tell you, it's a great question. It's a bit of a goofy business and it's unusual, but we just have a blast with it. And some of the things we like is that we get to do some meaningful work. We're not claiming that our goats save the world or that they're going to be the answer to every environmental challenge, but we do feel like we are making a small but meaningful contribution to the conservation of our lands. We get to work outside. Look at this beautiful picture that I had up earlier. That was a job for me that week or that 2 weeks, was to be at that 30-acre site and by a beautiful lake, keeping an eye on my goats. And what a blast it was. We add value to our goat herd. So we would not still be in the meat goat business. And I'll talk more about the agricultural side of things in a little bit here, but we would have gotten out of the meat goat business very early on if not for the extra revenue from goats on the go. In fact, it turns out that the meat goats are the extra revenue and the real revenue is the goat grazing company. We are able to continue expanding our goat herd by keeping every female we produce and only being able to sell the male goats that we produce. And yet, because of the extra revenue from goats on the go, we are profitable. And our herd keeps expanding and it keeps gaining in value as it grows. So it's a great way to start from scratch. If you think you want to own goats, those first years can be really hard as you're trying to start from a handful of goats and grow it into a meaningfully sized herd. But it really helps to have the extra revenue from a goat grazing business. Not only that, but if you already own a business, a complementary business, like you're a landscaper or you're a private forester, or maybe you have a farm business where you take your products into the farmer's market every Saturday and or you sell direct to consumers other farm products. What an amazing way to get some extra positive public relations by layering goats on the go and a goat grazing business on top of your existing enterprise. The cross-promotional opportunities are huge. People love goats. The media loves goats. So it's a great opportunity to get some extra exposure and then promote your original business at the same time. And you would get to be at the forefront of an in-demand industry. Like I said, it's a very young industry, young enough so that we are still innovators. And anybody who joins Goats on the Go and becomes and owns a goat grazing business is an innovator still. There's a lot of room to grow and learn and expand. But at the same time, we're far enough into the industry with Goats on the Go that we have figured some things out, and you get a great deal of support from us, and you're not starting at 0 miles per hour. So why would you want to be a Goats on the Go affiliate then? Well, I'll tell you, if you're interested in owning and controlling your own business, this is a great opportunity. If you become an affiliate of Goats on the Go, you are not a franchise, which means we don't direct the day-to-day details of your business. You are free to operate your business as you see fit. Instead of being a franchisee, you in essence license the Goats on the Go trademark and brand name and all of our proprietary information, along with our support and training to operate your own business. Again, to start at 60 miles per hour instead of 0 miles per hour. You get instant brand identity right out of the gate. So if you were to start a goat grazing business on your own, you'd have to go out and develop your own brand, your own logo, your own name, your own website, develop your own reputation, and you're probably 2 or 3 years in before you really have some brand recognition and an identity that people recognize. But with Goats on the Go, you are part of that identity immediately that we have already established. Again, so far with 14 affiliates in 5 states and broad social media following and leads coming in from all over the country. Our Goats on the Go affiliates get exclusive territories, so their boundaries do not overlap with any other Goats on the Go affiliate, so there's no competition with anyone inside of Goats on the Go. That's really important to us. We're not interested in competing. We want to bring as many goat businesses as possible under the Goats on the Go fold, so that we're all operating and contributing to the momentum of one brand. We will provide a model pricing structure for you. Again, it's your own independently owned and operated business, so you don't have to follow the details of our pricing structure, but it's something that we know works, and you would likely find it to be very useful with just a little bit of tweaking to your own market. We will help you segment your customers. So one of the things we do at our training is detail the customer segments that are profitable for us at Goats on the Go. So what that means is we can also tell you which customer segments are not profitable. And we can tell you how best to promote to this particular customer segment and how best to promote to this particular customer segment, and save yourselves a lot of money and wasted time and effort from promoting and trying to capture customers from segments that just aren't profitable or aren't likely to hire you. And we have an annual training event and ongoing support. So our affiliates are required to attend the training event, and they have unlimited support from us through our internal communications app or email or phone. We will even do an on-site consultation with you. That's not free because of the travel involved, but we will come to your site and help you walk through your very first project, or do a practice run with you, or come and troubleshoot one particular issue you're having. I mentioned information. I mentioned our internal communications app. All of our affiliates are on one chat app just for Goats on the Go. And so we're sharing information back and forth among ourselves all the time. Information about how to operate a goat grazing business. Hey, does this work for you? Have you ever tried this? What height fencing do you like? All of those sorts of things. But also just questions on goat production. Does anybody have a breeding buck that I can buy or rent? Does anybody have does for sale this year? Which dewormer works for you? All those types of questions. We think that we're quickly putting together the best source of information on goat production just inside our own affiliate network. Each of our affiliates gets their own page on our website. So customers come to our website, they're able to read general information about how goat grazing works, get some FAQs answered, but then they're very quickly referred to the affiliate that is nearest them geographically. They get to that particular affiliate's page on our website, and then they can get in contact directly with the affiliate. So the founders of Goats on the Go step out of the way and let the communication happen between the potential customer and the appropriate affiliate. You can get discounts on fencing and equipment by being an affiliate. The equipment that we use is Premier One Supplies equipment. It's a company actually based here in Iowa that's well known all over the country and all over the world for the electric netting and other electric fencing accessories that it produces. We have negotiated a deal on behalf of all of our affiliates to deliver dealer pricing to each affiliate. Goats on the Go doesn't get a cut of that. We don't get a kickback or a commission. We simply provide that discount to our affiliates so that they get dealer pricing on the entire catalog from that company. We provide model promotional tools, sales forms, contracts, customer agreements, all of these things so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And one of the biggest questions we have other than pricing is, what kind of insurance do I get? Where do I get it? And that's a challenge because not every insurance agent knows how to deal with a goat grazing company. And we worked with 3 different companies, all of which were adequate. The one we're with now, we're fired up about and really feel like they understand who we are and give us the best possible price. So we also provide guidance to our affiliates on getting insured. So what about the goats? I'm often asked, well, do I need my own goats? And yes, affiliates must provide their own healthy, suitable goats. However, we do have a limited lease program for affiliates that are within driving distance of us here in Ames, Iowa, so that we can lease goats to them. That's actually a really nice benefit because while we are fired up about the agricultural side of goats on the go, not everybody else is. Some folks just want to run that goat grazing business during the grazing season. And so our goat lease program allows them to have goats dropped off before their season begins and picked up when their season ends, and they don't have to worry about kidding or breeding or winter chores. So it's a really good opportunity if they are within driving distance of central Iowa. We like full-size breeds, but other than that, we don't really have a strong breed preference. We just want to make sure that our affiliates are using goats that grew up in a pasture-type setting with a variety of vegetation and had to go out and feed themselves, rather than having been brought every meal to them in a bucket. We recommend a minimum of 20 goats to be profitable. We know you can be profitable in 20 goats if you have a good market. But 30 or 40 lets you be just that much more profitable. So we have this 10-acre threshold that we hold our affiliates to, and it's worth mentioning now. All our affiliates are allowed to do projects under 10 acres. And some of our potential affiliates have asked, well, what's that all about? I don't really understand why you put that limit on me. So I just want to talk about that a little bit. Essentially, we're directing our affiliates to choose the most profitable jobs, the projects with the highest profit margin. And so I'm just going to use a couple of pictures to demonstrate that. This is a typical small project for us. It's 1.5 to 2 acres. It's at the back of a suburban home where someone built their dream house with a little bit of the lot that is wooded and drops off in slope, and it's gorgeous. But it also is full of brush and nuisance vegetation, so much so that the property owners cannot even really use those beautiful woods. And that's what they bought the property for to begin with. So they are willing to pay us a pretty high price to come in with our goats to do this, both because it helps solve their vegetation problem and because it's a lot of fun. And because they're only doing 1.5 acres or so, the price per acre really isn't that critical. We get in, we're at this project for 3-4 days, maybe 5 days. We get it done, we get out, we get a check, and we move on to the next property and the next project. And that's really great because it means we're only working with any one customer for at most a week or 10 days on average. And so if we get that customer that's really hard to work with and difficult to work with, we grin and bear it, we satisfy the customer as best we can, and we get to move on to the next project. Take a picture by comparison. This is that project in northwest Iowa on this large lake. It's for the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. This was 20 plus acres, grazed twice. With a herd of 250, that still took us nearly 2 months. And you can imagine the logistics involved to do this size of a project. Even 7, 8, or 9 acres, though our affiliates are allowed to do those, are big projects that tie up your herd for a very long time and make the time between paychecks very long as well. Another problem with this type of project, though we often do them as the founders of Goats on the Go out of central Iowa, a project of this size, the logistics are very challenging and the profit margins are very slim. Just like if you go to Costco, you're going to buy a giant jar of pickles for a fairly low price, and the cost per pickle is really low. That means that the profit margin on that is very low as well. We're trying to make it up in volume. But what that means is that if we are not very efficient, if we make even just 1 or 2 mistakes, our profit margin starts to disappear in a hurry. So we'd much rather that our affiliates work on the smaller projects rather than the large projects. That said, we're based in central Iowa. If you are outside of a few hours drive from us and you have a project that's over 10 acres and you think you can be profitable at it, the contract does allow you to consult with us and for us to agree together that you can and should go ahead and do that larger project. I just wanted to show you a picture of one of our affiliate profile pages on our website. And this is very typical of our affiliates. They're families that have a relatively small herd of goats. They are much like us in that we wanted to take our operation beyond just a hobby, and we wanted it to be profitable, and we wanted to be engaged in agriculture, even though we didn't grow up in farming families and we didn't inherit 1,000 acres of land. And so we're finding folks like this all over the country that are really benefiting from being associated with Goats on the Go. So here's the big question that you may all be wondering about. How much does it cost? Our annual license fee is roughly $2,000. So to be a Goats on the Go affiliate and offer your service as a Goats on the Go affiliate, the fee is $2,000 annually. There's a 2-year initial commitment. So you do lock yourself in for 2 years, and after those 2 years are up, the contract is renewable annually. There are monthly payment options. They cost a little more than the annual option. There's also an option to pay the full first 2 years up front, and that saves you a little bit of money. We do require our affiliates to attend a training, which is held in Iowa. So there is some cost associated with that. It's just a 1-day training. We try to keep it very dense so that our affiliates who are flying in don't have to spend multiple nights in a hotel. And our affiliates must purchase commercial liability insurance. Again, we can help point them in the right direction on that. And we do require our affiliates to use that Premier One Supplies electric netting and fence energizers. The reason for that is because we are not a franchise. We don't have a lot of input or a lot of opportunity to exert quality control over our affiliates. But the one way that we can do that, besides training them very, very well, is to require that they don't cut corners on the most important thing, which is keeping those goats contained. And so you can imagine that it would be bad for every affiliate if any one affiliate repeatedly had issues with goats escaping, getting out on roads, eating people's landscaping, that sort of thing. Bear with me 1 second. So I want to talk a little bit about, as we wrap up tonight's webinar, I want to talk a little bit about our unfair farming advantage. Again, our story is based on wanting to be farmers and wanting to farm in an environmentally and ecologically sound way. We really feel like we found an approach to farming that allows us to get in without a lot of land cost, allows us to be profitable, and allows us to operate the way we want to operate. And that starts with the fact that we have these problem plants, those nuisance and invasive species all over the place. They are abundant, and as it turns out, they're highly nutritious. Problem is, only goats can utilize those plants. And when they do, they actually thrive on them. These plants are right up there with alfalfa and other traditional forages in the amount of crude protein and nutritional content that they have. So if you have a plant that can, if you have a livestock animal that can use that vegetation and it's free, I think you can see where we're headed here. Problem plants are free feed. Now, that's something to get excited about. We have free pasture everywhere. everywhere we go, we are solving a problem for somebody, feeding our goats at no cost, and producing more and more goat meat in our case, or dairy product in someone else's case. But very quickly, we realized when we started this business that I guess our expectations were raised, or we got greedy or something, because it turns out that problem plants are free feed. That's not good enough. What's really great is that our goats are paid to eat problem plants. We are paid to take our goats to eat someone else's vegetation on their property without us purchasing the property or renting the property or paying property taxes on it. We're actually invited and paid to be there with our goats. So what that translates to is a low land cost, dual revenue, flexible cash flow system. We don't own very much land. We don't rent land. We have two streams of revenue on our goats. We get paid to have them out grazing, and we get paid when we produce a goat meat product. And because we're not tied to the usual cycles, because we're getting that extra revenue stream, we don't have to sell our goats at a traditional weight or a traditional time, or to even a traditional market. We have a lot of flexibility in when and how we market our meat goats. And what that means is that we are paid to produce goat meat, and we're paid for the product of goat meat. In most agricultural endeavors, the production phase is where all the cost is. But for us, the production phase is just one other area that revenue is produced. So we have income on both stages, both when we produce the animal and when we sell the animal. That's something to be excited about, and we would love to share that with you. And even if you're not interested, as we are, in the agricultural production part of this, we have just been really pleased with the demand for commercial goat grazing, and we think that you'd find it to be quite profitable. If your market can support it, you'd find it to be quite profitable as well, even without the meat or milk production. So if you'd like to take the next step, I'm going to send you a follow-up email tomorrow if you attended today. And in that email, there's going to be an opportunity for you to complete the request form, and we'll send you a flyer that kind of summarizes the information from tonight. Feel free to just call us. You don't need an appointment. Just dial us up anytime to ask more questions. In that email that I'll send you tomorrow, there will also be a link to complete the online affiliate application. That would be the next step. If you say, I'm not ready to commit yet, but I want you to know that I want to keep talking about it. That's how we know that you're ready to just chat more, no commitment at all. We do need you, if you are committed to this and you really want to pursue it and own your own goat grazing company, we have an agreement that you need to review and sign. You need to pay your affiliate fee. And I actually have the old training date in there. We had our first training March 3rd, and we have not scheduled our second training yet. But we definitely want to get that in before the grazing season starts, and that is fast approaching here as things warm up. So those would be the next possible steps for you to pursue this further. I want to thank you so much for listening tonight and tuning in.